Take my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Not that long ago, I posted a video called America the Slow. Yet it must be said that many Americans indeed wanted to go fast. Very fast. And to do this, the USA needed a place to do it both legally and safely. And so, in true American fashion, the USA set to build a racetrack. And not just any racetrack, but the largest sports venue in the world. So today, we're going to take a brief look at how that racetrack came into being. So let's talk about the Brickyard. Organized bicycle racing has been going on in the US since the 1870s. And of course, many of the American bicycle manufacturers began to make cars in the late 1890s. Most cities had one or more local cycle dealerships, and many of the owners of these dealerships added cars to their lineup as their bike suppliers made them available. Racing is a good way to promote and thus sell a car brand, so the early car dealers began to promote racing in general. Other prominent American auto enthusiasts, such as Gordon Bennett and William Vanderbilt, organized significant races, with the 1904 Vanderbilt Cup being the first major race circuit in the country. Yet there were significant challenges with these races, particularly safety for the cars, their crews, and the spectators. Injuries and deaths were not uncommon, as these race circuits were held on public roads and not dedicated racetracks. One of the early car dealers that wanted to get people racing was Carl Fisher. He, like William Metzger, was a bike-turned-car dealer, with Carl's showroom located in the automotive boomtown of Indianapolis, Indiana. In 1904, Fisher partnered with a friend of his, James Allison, and they bought the patent for and began to manufacture acetylene headlights. And within a few years, they were the aftermarket source for them to just about every car maker in the U.S., and Carl and James became extremely wealthy. It was in 1905 that he had an idea about racing. At the time, races had two primary problems. First, the roads being raced on weren't built for it, and accidents were common. Second, the roads were point-to-point, so there was no way to actually see the whole race, only bits of it as cars passed by. What if he built an oval racetrack with stands for the spectators that kept them reasonably safe and allowed for them to see the entire race? It would take a few years and some financial partnerships to get things underway. He heard about Brooklands and visited the track for its first official race. Now, further inspired, Carl began to look around for a place to actually build such a venue near his hometown, something big enough and flat enough to fit his vision. He found some property available the following year, Presley Farm, 328 acres of nice flat farmland about 5 miles west of town. The next step was to acquire the property and the capital to build the track. Carl reached out to his friend James, as well as a couple of others he knew, Arthur Newby and Frank Wheeler, to all pitch in, buy the farm, and start construction. Carl and James each put in $75,000, while Arthur and Frank each added $50,000 to the coffers. Now funded, they formed a new company, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Company, and purchased the land for $72,000. Construction of the speedway began in early 1909. Some 500 workers with their mules and machines scraped the ground and constructed grandstands. Fisher originally wanted to make the track 3 miles long, but this turned out to not fit well into the land they owned. So the partners settled on a track that was basically a square oval of a total of 2.5 miles of track, with high-banked turns a la Brooklands. The track itself was, at this point, covered in crushed gravel to help keep the dust down. There was more to the speedway than the track. Along the two 5/8 mile straightways, grandstands were installed, with the largest of them being at the starting-finish line. Concessions were, of course, available. Opposite of the main grandstand was the officiator's tower and the flagman for the race. Nearby, garages to supply the cars on the track were installed, the pits. Inside the oval were administration buildings, medical facilities, and larger garages for repairing vehicles, and more viewing access for spectators. They hadn't even finished the track yet when it was decided to host a race at the Speedway, being held on June 5th, 1909. Oddly enough, the first race held there was a helium balloon race, yet 40,000 people showed up to see the 9 participants take off and drift to who knows where. The winner, a craft named Universal City, won the first event at the Speedway after landing a day later, almost 400 miles away in Alabama. Carl Fisher was impressed by the turnout and wanted to make sure the stands would be full of paying customers. So he hired a press agent to come up with events and promote them. The man he chose was Ernest Moross, a great promoter with much experience in the American automotive world. He had been Barney Oldfield's promoter for years and was one of the early progenitors of barnstorming. The perfect man to make the Speedway an exciting place to be. A couple of months later, the first motorsport event was held. Organized and promoted by Ernest, he himself was the starter for the race. A planned 2-day motorcycle racing event sanctioned by the Federation of American Motorcyclists. The race was canceled after the first day. The gravel track made it extremely difficult to control the motorbikes on the turns and was deemed unsafe for motorcycle racing. Undaunted, Ernest organized a bigger race for the next week, a series of races over 3 days sanctioned through the American Automobile Association. To prepare the track for the events, the teams added more gravel as well as oil and tar, sort of a primitive chip seal. This turned out to not be such a good idea, as the oil and tar often blinded the drivers, and it also allowed deep ruts to form on the track, especially on the 4 turns. About 20,000 spectators showed up for the first day, and the drivers were not pleased with the track conditions. Tragedy struck that day when driver Wilfred Baroque and his mechanic Harry Halcombe would be the first to lose their lives at the Speedway. AAA insisted that the rest of the event be canceled until the track can be repaired. Fisher went to work immediately with the crews making repairs, and, along with his pleading, AAA green-lighted the rest of the event. The second day of festivities also drew some 20,000 people and was successful. No major incidents. However, the third day, the grand finale of the event, was not so blessed. The last race was a 300-mile monster, and some 35,000 people showed up to see it. The race was at about the 175-mile mark when the car driven by Charlie Mers blew a tire, toppled, and plowed through the fence and into about a dozen spectators. Most were injured and 2 were killed, along with Charlie's mechanic, Claude Kellum. Another 25 miles into the race, and driver Bruce Keene hit one of the many potholes, lost control, and slammed into a bridge support. The AAA halted the race at that point, issued the surviving drivers fancy participation certificates, and no winners were declared. The AAA also boycotted the Speedway until it could be safely used for auto racing. Fisher and his friends looked for options on how to make the place safe for cars and people, and chose to make some major modifications. First, they erected concrete barrier walls almost 3 feet high in front of the grandstands, as well as at the turns where most spectators could otherwise be in harm's way. But famously, they chose to properly pave the track, which meant either using concrete or bricks. They chose the latter and hired just about every major brick maker in Indiana to send bricks like crazy. In the end, over 3.2 million of them. The workers first re-leveled the track with sand to get rid of the potholes and ruts, and then hand-laid each individual brick set and mortared. Indeed, the last brick on the track was gold-plated and was installed with great ceremony, the governor of Indiana, Thomas Marshall, presiding. Race trials began again in late December 1909, and the track proved to be both suitable for racing and safe for the spectators, and so the AAA ended the sanctions, allowing racing to return to the now christened Brickyard in 1910. 3 racing weekends were chosen: the U.S. holidays Memorial Day, the 4th of July, and Labor Day. Fully sanctioned by AAA, over 60 races were held across these 3 weekends without significant incident or injury. The Brickyard was a success. Ernest Moroz left the Speedway team in late 1910, as did the marketing focus for the venue. Fisher decided to open the track once a year, specifically on Memorial Day, to host the biggest motorsport event in America, which he called the Indianapolis 500, to be first held on Memorial Day weekend of 1911. Some 80,000 people turned out for the race, as well as 40 race teams. The race was won by Ray Harroun in his Marmon Wasp race car, and in a rather unique way. In order to save weight, he raced alone with no mechanic. However, since his mechanic wasn't in the car to warn him of anything happening behind him, he installed a small mirror to the top of his windshield frame, the first rear view mirror. The Brickyard is the oldest racetrack in America, the biggest sports venue on the planet, and except due to World War interruptions, has been hosting races continually since 1910. Many of the great American racers built their careers and set records there. Barney Oldfield, Louis Chevrolet, and David Buick, just to name a few. Because in the final analysis, Americans do really like to go fast. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.